Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
All right. Welcome back. We are continuing our theme of technology. I call it you, me, and the robots in the most Long Island accent that I can think of. We spent last episode talking about catfishing in great detail. Today we're going to be talking about something adjacent to catfishing, or something that can perhaps lead to or be the result of catfishing. We're going to be talking in great detail about sexting. And to help me do that, we have yet another new guest joining the pod, Dr. Tasha Falconer. So good to have you on the pod. Thank you so much for joining us.
To be here. I'm really excited to chat about sexting.
Heck yeah. So when we have new guests, we like to just take a moment or two to do a full introduction. So you could, if you could, maybe your elevator speech, who you are, what your background is, and what your expertise are in this realm of sexting.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Dr. Tasha Falconer. I'm a sexologist, so someone who studies human sexuality, and a sex educator. I'm connected with the University of Guelph, the University of Waterloo, and Trent University, all of which are in Ontario, Canada. I've worked with some national organizations in Canada, such as the Sex Information and Education Council of Canada, also known as CCAN, as well as Action Canada. And I've also worked with organizations in other countries, such as the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society. And my research really focuses broadly on a variety of sexual health topics, including sexual and gender-based violence, consent, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, body image, gender inequality. But I spent a number of years researching sexting, particularly when it was kind of in its infancy in research.
Very nice. That was so succinct. And I, not to brag, but I have published a manuscript in the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality. They were very kind reviewers. Yeah, back when I was doing, when I was working with my dissertation advisor on friends with benefits relationships, we had a piece published in that journal. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for joining the show. We are, of course, going to talk about sexting today, but you are more than welcome to allow your various other areas of research to blend in to the conversation as you see fit. So, ready to get going?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's appropriate if we kind of start with maybe a brief history of sexting and just kind of talk about, like, where did it come from? When was it popularized? For example, like were people like always sending dirty messages to each other, like writing notes longhand and sending them via carrier pigeon back in the 1800s? Or is this kind of a new thing where people use receipts to exchange those sorts of sexual messages with each other?
Yeah, so a lot of people really like to think this is a new behavior, and so there's all these concerns, but the reality is it's not. It's really just a new iteration of a behavior that's existed for a long time. As technology has advanced, we've been able to do things in different formats, but the behavior itself hasn't really changed that much. And so we know historically that people have been sending messages about sex for as long as we've existed, right? We have found even before Common Era that there's evidence of erotic papyrus around 1000 BCE, and people are chronicling sex acts on papyrus. So this is not new, and we see if we skip ahead a number in time that in more recent area, we know that like erotic letter writing was big in the early 1900s. It's hard to know how common this was, but certainly popular figures were engaging in erotic letter writing. We have Warren G. Harding, the 29th president of the United States, writing erotic letters in which he's referring to his penis as Jerry and talking about, how he wants to be embraced through the lips of his lover, and sending these letters on a regular basis, and also talking about having previously sent photos of Jerry. So we really see the behavior being the same, just in a really different format. And we know emails were also big when we kind of came about on email. People started kind of essentially sexting, but through email versus through phone. So The behavior is not particularly new, but this iteration through technology and how fast we can do things, we're not waiting weeks for our carrion pigeons to arrive or for our letters to get somewhere, that anyone could see the letter in the process, right? There's a little bit maybe more safety in terms of who all sees it, or maybe less safety with today's technology. But yeah, it's really not a new behavior. We've been chronicling writings and pictures of genitals and our sex lives for millennia.
What I'm hearing is that it's possible. Now, I know you can't confirm this, but it's possible that a United States president sent the first ever unsolicited dick pic. Am I hearing that right?
It's possible. We certainly can't confirm that.
Okay.
We have not checked in with everyone that was here in the early 1900s, but certainly we have seen proof that the US president did send potentially unsolicited, potentially solicited dick pics.
Fair enough. Very disturbing. All right. So as you mentioned, I think the distinction here is not that the behavior is new, but rather that the methodology is more advanced, more accessible. I think about when I was growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was this big rage over chat rooms and sex chat rooms, right?
Oh, yeah.
And as a 10-year-old, I didn't partake in any of that, right? But now we have, in many ways, our own mini chat room that lives in the supercomputer in our pocket. So we are capable of doing this thing with much more ease and with much more breadth than we once were. So that said, now that we've kind of covered the what, I want to shift on to like the why. Like, what does sexting do for people, right? Like, what benefits do people reap from sexting? And then maybe while you're at it, what are the drawbacks of this behavior, of these exchanges?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest kind of benefit that we see is gratification, right? People are seeing this as a form of sexual expression, enjoyment, they get pleasure out of it. It's just another kind of aspect of people's sexual lives. But they also really enjoy kind of the connection of intimacy, the feelings of closeness that they can get through sexting. In other ways, we see some people using this as like a digital foreplay almost, and sexting throughout the day, and then they get home and they, can actually physically engage together, and so kind of ramping each other up throughout the day. It's really kind of a fun thing to do, I think, is what people see the most, and it's a bit novel, so it can be something to add to your relationship that kind of spices things up a little bit differently than maybe you had before. And seeing, potential improvements in sexual and relationship satisfaction and quality of relationships. So really seeing a lot of these kind of benefits. And it also opens up a door to talk in a way that is easy. Sometimes it can be difficult to talk in person, face to face about sex, right? Our society is not really encouraging of that. And so that can be difficult for people. And so being able to do it over a technological device, you can think about what you want your response to be or what you want to say. You get kind of time to digest the information that you're given. You can talk about fantasies that you're interested in engaging with, or things that you would like to do, or experiences that you had in the past that you want to go back to. It's really just an opportunity for people to discuss their sexual lives in a way that a lot of people find an easy format.
Yeah, I think that, excuse me, I think that the notion of saving face is big here, because people are able to, like you said, express their desire for certain things, or even like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, test run certain practices or episodes or events that they think that they might like. And then, you can conjure it in your mind, and if that's pleasing, then maybe you take the next step and actually physically do it. So I think that actually, I mean, from a communication standpoint, which is, of course, my forte, from that standpoint, it feels like there's a lot to be gained from this, in so much as you can protect your face and you can sort of practice with a partner or a potential partner to see what you and or they are into. I want to circle back just a little bit and talk more about these detriments, because in a moment here, I want to talk about how we balance the good with the bad. Now, obviously, consent is a big thing discussed in all sex comm and in I'm sure in sexology as well.
Mhm.
It strikes me that one of the biggest drawbacks of sexting is that the opportunities to break consent are bountiful, both in terms of sending someone, for example, an unsolicited picture of your genitals, but also in terms of, for example, if you're role playing with a partner, right, and you are engaging in acts of non-consensual sex in the role play, but maybe wouldn't want to do that in person. I feel as though there's sort of almost like a Pandora's box that might be opened. Do you have any thoughts on the that potential, that element of consent, and how it might be one of the more problematic drawbacks of sexting?
Yeah, it's certainly a big concern. I mean, we've seen huge numbers, in the 70s and the 80% of people that have received unsolicited genital pictures that they don't want and generally like are not looking for. They don't enjoy receiving those, that breakage of consent, obviously. And so that is a huge concern that you're just randomly going to be sent something that you're not wanting. And I think your point is really interesting of like, if you're engaging in something through text, but that you don't want to engage in person with, it may feel like the line is blurred a little bit there. But certainly when we think about how consent functions and how people should be using consent, that there should be an understanding that what's happening kind of on the phone may not be continued in person. And that's a conversation within it that you can have in terms of, what, I'm really enjoying this. Let's try this in person, or, let's keep this to the technology based. I don't want to do this in person. Or even like you start sexting and you're like, I don't like the path this particular thing's going down, or I don't want to do this at all. Those kind of continuous conversations of consent are really important.
Right.
And continuing to kind of have them throughout.
Yeah. So, okay. I'll use myself as an example for this next question. The last 3 relationships that I have been in were long distance. Not the longest of distances, but long distance nonetheless, including my current relationship. Does sexting look different for long distance couples? There's a fair amount of LDR research in communication that talks about some of the ways in which those couples differ in terms of satisfaction, in terms of communication patterns. I'm wondering if you have any knowledge about sexting specifically, if it's more integral to those sorts of relationships, or if the content is different, or that the frequency of the sexting is different. Do you know anything about those areas?
Yeah, for sure. So we haven't really found, and we haven't really looked too much into content-wise and differences there, but we have found frequency is quite different. So those in long-distance relationships, or even who are just away from their partners for a short or longer extended period of time, are more likely to engage in sexting and engage in it kind of more consistently throughout time. And that those in long distance relationships it's just more common for their relationships to have sexting versus someone who can see their partner every other day or whatever their timeline is.
Yeah.
So because they can't connect physically quite as often, they use sexting as that way to connect intimately more. And so it does become an important piece to be able to connect sexually through sexting. And so that does look different in that way for those who are in long distance relationships.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by especially for those who are in truly long distance relationships. Like I'll say, right now I'm in a quote unquote long distance relationship. My partner is a 2-hour car drive away. I think that's just on the edge, right? I think it's just long enough distance to call it long distance. But like, for example, one person living in Ontario and another person living in New Mexico. That's a truly long distance and international relationship. And I'm wondering the ways in which, how do I want to phrase this? I'm wondering how sexting might potentially help or harm a relationship like that. I'll give a quick example. A long distance relationship, texting, sexting back and forth, they're able to set expectations pretty clearly. And then ideally when they get together, the research tells us that they're often on their best behavior. And this probably includes sexual performance as well, right? Really wanting to impress their partner. A couple who live down the block or in the same town, I wonder if not having that avenue to explore things with disrupts or mitigates sexual efforts on the part of one partner or the other, not knowing how to bring it up, not knowing how to bring it into the bedroom, whereas in the long-distance relationship, there's that medium where they can sample things, try things out. I mean, I don't know if such research exists, but even in your own speculation, what are your thoughts about that phenomenon?
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, the research does show that when couples get together who are long distance, particularly as you mentioned, like substantially long distance, who aren't seeing each other on a regular basis, that they kind of put on that best face. And we can kind of make, I think, a similar assumption with physical sexual behavior as well, which probably could go a number of ways. It could work out really well, or it could cause things like performance anxiety, where we start to have issues there. So having that medium, I think, could be really beneficial to kind of take the pressure off a little bit. I haven't seen a lot of research backing that up, but that would be my kind of theory around that.
Yeah, we can opine. We're allowed to, right? We're experts. Close enough. It would make, I think, a very interesting study, though, probably a qualitative study where you would like interview participants, talk to them about, how have you used this in your relationship? How, if at all, has this like bridged the gap between fantasy and actual physical connection? I think it could be fruitful, to say the least.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have one more main question for you, and then if we have time, I'll get to my bonus question, which I hope we do because it's a fun one, but... final big take that I want from you. When we talk about relationships, especially like fledgling relationships, like newly forming relationships, how can we manage the desire to share these intimate, sexy messages with this person while balancing, for example, face needs, or balancing the fear that we might have of receiving something like an unsolicited dick pic? Are there techniques, are there practices, are there trends, are there norms that help guide us as we sext, or are we just like swinging wildly?
I think a bit of mix of both. We certainly see people looking to take precautions to kind of protect themselves. Unsolicited dick pics are hard to protect yourself from because people can access us kind of in any way, and there's not always a lot of ways to block them, at least the first time. But concerns around unintended recipients seeing something that you've sent, that's a big concern people have. And there are ways that people look to protect themselves from that. Things like, using areas that are not obvious. So not putting their face in it, not putting any identifying features that they might have, tattoos or jewelry that they wear a lot, or anything that's going to kind of give away who they are. People also tend to be really specific in who they're sending to, right? They're really primarily sending to romantic partners. There's certainly some people sending to casual sex partners, but not as frequently as we see people sending to people that they have a lot of trust in.
Right, I was about to say trust. Yeah.
Yeah, the trust where the pictures aren't going to go anywhere. So certainly people making these things, asking partners to delete them after they've seen them, doing kind of these aspects to try as much as they can to negate these risks. Obviously, risks come with any behavior that we engage in, but whatever we can do to reduce the harm is kind of as good as we're going to get with anything.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is that consent piece you mentioned, right? So not wanting to get something at certain times. So making those boundaries, right? Maybe it's we don't send them during work time because I don't want to be in the middle of a meeting to get a picture.
Or maybe we do if it's one of those relationships.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm not sure. I'm just not trying to yuck anyone's yum. I think we're trying to be as open as we can here.
Absolutely. So whatever the boundaries are
Right.
that you want to set, those are the ones that you're setting, right? And that could be at certain times. It could be using certain platforms. So some will say like, okay, only this platform is for sexting, and the only thing we're going to put on that is sex, so that if you get a notification from that platform, exactly what you're going to open.
Yeah.
And then you can choose, I don't want to open that right now. It's not appropriate, or it's a good time. I'm going to open and engage with that. So having kind of those boundaries and the different ways that we can engage with sexting is really kind of the best we have to be able to manage those concerns.
Okay, that's fair. I'm just thinking about like, I don't know if this is still a thing, but I remember like when Snapchat was first popular, the whole thing was you can't take a screenshot because it will notify your partner. And then there was some sort of app that made it so that you could screenshot and no one would know. And like, so this is what I'm thinking about when I think about consent, right? Where this like cyber consent, which is totally new. And like, you have that expectation of, for example, a partner, like, well, you're not going to share this with anyone. The picture will be deleted. You can never see it again. And then having someone on the other end secretly screenshotting it without your knowledge. It's dangerous and it's potentially very harmful. And so, yeah, especially with new relationships, I think you make a really good point about boundary setting, the importance of setting that, okay, well, we're only going to use Snapchat for sexy stuff and then everything else is just going to be normal stuff. And then, I don't know, maybe as the relationship progresses, those worlds blend, but at least at the beginning, setting those boundaries, I think, is very good advice for folks who are wanting to do this, but maybe a little sketched out by the whole deal. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people, as you know, right, like when you're further into the relationship and you trust your partner and you don't think that they would send anything, people still have concerns, right? What if their phone got lost or stolen or hacked or someone sees it over your shoulder? And so those accidental unintended recipients exist there too. And so doing some of these things like deleting and creating these boundaries help with those as well and just help kind of mitigate people's fears and concerns.
That would be the ideal. All right, speaking of fears and concerns, we do have a little bit of time left for my bonus question, which is great because, in my opinion, it's a fun bonus question. You could take it or leave it. My question is, in your time studying sexting, what is the most, as the kids say, out of pocket or outrageous sext message you've ever come across in your experience as a researcher?
Yeah, they tend to, the ones that I think are the most outrageous are the ones that are like just emojis, just like a sentence of emojis. They have like 8 or 10 emojis, and you're trying to decode what this means based on all the different emojis. And it might take a while to figure out what is trying to be said sometimes. But yeah, when we just have like a string of emojis, I think those tend to be the most outrageous ones as you try to piece together what exactly they're trying to communicate with you.
Yeah, I'm picturing it in my head. Eggplant, thumbs up, soccer ball, postage card stamp, firework, stuff like that, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really good. All right, so it seems like, okay, now, that actually has me thinking about like nonverbal communication and ambiguity, because when you have to like sext someone verbally, I think that there's a certain amount, again, of face threat that you experience when you say, I want to do X to Y, or I'd like to touch this, or I'd like, you know what I mean? But when it's just emojis, there's a certain degree of strategic ambiguity or plausible deniability, such that like, I don't know if like another person sees it, kind of like you said, like someone looking over the shoulder, if there's a hacked situation, or like, I don't know, in my nightmare scenario, right, you're presenting at a conference via your laptop, and like a text message pops up on the slideshow, and the whole conference room sees it. If it's just a series of emojis, that offers you a little bit of flexibility, and it's also very silly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does offer you that flexibility and a bit of protection. And that, especially if it's long enough, if they're only seeing it for a second on your slides, and hopefully you've been able to get rid of it in a quick time, that they haven't figured out what it means yet. Because it does take a minute sometimes to kind of decode. So yeah, for sure. It definitely gives that extra layer of protection.
Yeah, you were talking about like ancient hieroglyphs depicting sex acts. We've sort of come full circle with the emojis.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we have.
All right, well, that's we're just about ready to wrap up. So, Dr. Falconer, I will thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing some of your wisdom about sexting.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, quick little post-amble, not sure if that's a word, quick little post-amble here as we move forward with the season. We have a couple more episodes planned. We have an additional episode that's sort of up in the air, waiting to hear back from a guest, but I know we'll have at least 2 more episodes this season. And then I think I might try and do a solo episode either the summer, the end of the season. We'll see where that goes. But for now, we have at least 2 more episodes, so that'll be a good time. In the meantime, we here are back from spring break, and before you know it, it's going to be the end of the semester. So study up and try not to sex too much when you should be doing work. All right? We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from a podcast studio.